We're going to come to order now, please. If you want to continue your conversations, please take them out in the hallway. We're going to get started. And I believe that we're scheduled to get a report from our conference board and the PAG. And so if you, we can launch right into that, Dr. Wilson, unless you have other business or announcements to make.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, so conference board will come first, followed by the processes board. And then we'll break before a session on regulatory proposals. I did just want to make a general comment of appreciation. This is the first time we have ever had both the conference board and PAB reviewing and adopting their reports in session. In addition, those reports have now been published online and are available for anybody who's also listening in the web audience. So I guess I just wanted to have a note of appreciation for the staff who assisted those boards, for the co-chairs, and then obviously for all the board members who stuck around to assist with the adoption of those reports before lunch. So thank you with that, Chair. I'll pass to the chairs.
Ms. Binkin, please proceed.
Thank you. So I think our charge is to read through the report in its entirety, and it's long, so fasten your seatbelts. And I guess we'll skip the executive summary and just go to the meat. Yeah, okay. All right, so opening of the session. The 90th session of the IPHC Conference Board was held in Anchorage from February 4th through 6th, 2020. A total of 50, says 70 and 55, 70 in 2019 members attended the session from the two contracting parties. Canada accredited no new members, and the USA accredited 11 new members for participants in the 2020 Conference Board proceedings. The list of participants is provided in Appendix 1. The meeting was opened by Mr. Jim Lang from Canada and Mr. Jeff Kaufman from the USA as co-chairpersons, who welcome participants to Anchorage, Alaska. In accordance with Appendix 4, Section 3 of the IPHC Rules of Procedure, the CB noted the requirement to elect co-chairpersons and the option to elect up to 2 vice-chairpersons of the Conference Board until the beginning of the next session in 2021. The CB called for nominations for the positions of co-chairpersons of the CB until the opening of the next session in 2021. Mr. Jim Lane and myself were nominated, seconded, and elected as co-chairpersons. Adoption of the agenda and arrangements for the session. The CB adopted the agenda as provided at Appendix 2 with the addition of items on the IPHC Fishery Independent Setline Survey Design at 9.1 and size limits at 9.2. The documents provided to the CB 090 are those submitted for the 96th session of the IPHC annual meeting. The CB noted that it will convene on Thursday, 6th of February morning to adopt the report of the CB 090 for presentation to the commissioners on Thursday afternoon. The CB requested that to assist the CB in navigating its meeting each year, that all documents relevant to the agenda be posted or provided as links on the CB web page. Documents should include accreditation forms, rules of procedure, conference board agenda. The economic presentation was relevant specifically to this year, and links to documents to inform the discussions. The conference board term of reference proposal for the commissioners. The CB noted paper 2020 FAC 09609, which provided the Finance Administration Committee with proposed amendments to the IPHC Rules of Procedure. The paper included the proposed amendments drafted by the Conference Board Ad Hoc Work Group, who worked intersessionally to improve the current or 2019 terms of reference and accreditation process for Conference Board members. The CB recommended that the Commission adopt the revised IPHC Rules of Procedure, which contain the CB requested improvements with the following modifications. So this was unanimously adopted by both the US and Canada. Removal of paragraph 13, removal of number 9 from the accreditation form, and consistent spelling throughout of organization. IPHC Secretariat Informational Session. Definition of mortality limits and TCY. The CB noted the informal presentation by Dr. Ian Stewart, which included outlining the IPHC definition of total mortality and TCY as follows. Total mortality consists of all sources and sizes of dead Pacific halibut in 2 categories. 1, the TCY, and 2, U-26 discard mortality in non-directed fisheries. B, total constant exploitation yield, TCY. The current basis for commission mortality limits includes all sources and sizes of mortality except U-26 discards in non-directed fisheries. 4.2 MSAB update. The CB noted the review of the MSC process and MSAB reports provided by Dr. Ellen Hicks. IPHC understanding of movement. The CB noted the MSAB 014 presentation provided by Dr. Piera Carpi on movement and migration paths and patterns for Pacific halibut. Fishery economics. The CB noted the information presented by Dr. Barbara, and I'm not gonna try that last name because I know I'll get it wrong, Bashia, fisheries economist, which included a broad review of her current work to better understand the economic contribution of Pacific halibut and the connectivity to the supply chain, with initial focus on the commercial fishery. Number 5, fishing period, season opening and closing dates. The CB agreed that for both opening and closing, the dates should allow the longest fishing period possible. The following reasons were given for this rationale. Maximizing time to catch quota, longer season to satisfy markets, Pacific halibut bycatch considerations, and minimizing whale depredation. The CB noted their preference to open earlier than the 14th March 2020, as early as 29th February 2020, while also noting the comments expressed by NOAA Fisheries that they would struggle to have fishery regulations adopted in time for an earlier start date if adopted by the Commission, unless dates were adopted in the prior year. The CB requested the formation of an ad hoc stakeholder work group to review options for shifting to a year-round fishery. The work group will work with the IPHC Secretariat and contracting party staff to determine feasibility for an extended or year-round Pacific halibut fishery. The CB acknowledged the consultative process, which the IPHC Secretariat lead with all stakeholders and the Pacific Fishery Management Council to arrive at the proposed season length and dates for the regulatory area 2A. Non-treaty directed commercial fishery is described in paper IPHC 2020 AM096-Prop A2. Recommendations. The CB recommended the following fishing period dates for 2020. Opening March 14th. You can see the votes there. In favor 22, 2 against, and 20 abstentions. Closing date of 15th of November with 32 in favor, 1 against, and 1 abstention. Oh, 11 abstentions, I'm sorry. C, the non-treaty directed commercial fishery, 3-day fishing period as stated in IPHC 2020 AM096-Prop 2. In 16 in favor, 0 against, and 34 abstaining. Mortality limits. The CB noted the IPHC web-based mortality projection tool for use in the CB 090 and AM 096. There's a link there that was used quite a bit by stakeholders. Coastwide perspectives. The CB noted the review provided by Dr. Ellen Hicks regarding the MSC work within the MSAB and the results therein. The CB noted that the U.S.A. moved to approve a coastwide fishing intensity of F43 as modified by slow up, fast down, yielding a 2020 coastwide TCY of 36.9 million pounds, which equates to a fishing intensity between F41 and F42. The TCY for IPHC regulatory area 2B would be 18.2% of the total, or 6.72 million pounds. The remaining U.S. share of 30.18 million pounds will be divided in a following motion. Vote on that was Canada in favor, 0, against 14 with 0 abstentions, and the USA 36 in favor, 0 against with 3 abstentions. The CB noted the following perspectives shared by the conference board members from the USA. The MSC update paper, MA096-12 at pages 7 through 9, provided additional evaluation of an appropriate spawning biomass target and review of fishing intensities and variability constraints needed to achieve objectives identified by the MSAB and IPHC commissioners. Based on this evaluation, the MSAB recommended, and this is quoting from that, so quotes are in italicized in this report, MSAB 014-Rec 3, para 46, noting the current progress on evaluating coastwide fishing intensity. The MSAB recommended that a coastwide fishing intensity SPR of 43% with the 30-20 harvest control rule and with one of 2 constraints, 1 plus or minus 15% maximum change in total mortality, and or 2, slow up, fast down, be used in harvest strategy development process, and I, 3, a range of management procedures, including fishing intensity SPR of 40 to 46%, be considered in light of implementation variability within the closed loop simulations when investigating distribution. C, slow up, fast down was selected as the appropriate constraint because it is more responsive on a year-to-year basis than a 15% maximum constraint. The MSAB has recommended a further investigation of a combined slow up, fast down and 15% max constraint, which may further improve the procedure. D, the MSE and assessment support a generally higher fishing intensity. The assessment showed the average of the years that resulted in the 46 SPR now average 41%. And it is possible to use 43 as a reference level. E, the probability of stock dropping below B30 is essentially the same across a broad range of fishing intensities from F40 to F47, which is reflected in spawning biomass stock status portion of the decision table. F, the decision table shows a high probability of decline in stock status and potential future TCY reductions across a wide range of mortality levels. This is mostly due to future recruitment and stock assessment uncertainty rather than fishing pressures. Those two are a little redundant. Apologies. G, the resulting 36.9 million pound coastwide TCY represents a reduction from 2019, which is appropriate given declining stock size and near-term recruitment projections. The resulting 36.9 million pounds is between a F42 and an F41 value and within the F40 to 46 range identified by the MSAB and presented to the Commission at AM096. U.S.A. feels strongly that neither country should increase TCUI during a time of declining abundance, but notes that the U.S.A. is bearing most of the conservation burden in 2020 by reducing U.S. TCUIs by 5%, while Canada drops by only 1.4%. U.S. TCUI reduction is comparable to the resource decline. Canada's reduction is disproportionate to resource decline. J, no U26 adjustment was included in this motion because U26 mortality is currently accounted for in the stock assessment and SBR approach to harvest rates. I, the impact of bycatch and non-directed fisheries, including U26 bycatch, is a complex issue with downstream impacts varying from year to year. They reference this from paper AM096-10, which is option 4, notes that a negotiated solution is one option to distribution mitigation given, quote, there is no currently available information to inform the relative value of U26 Pacific halibut occurring in one IPHC regulatory area over another, but see below for research avenues. Therefore, at present, the distribution of U26 discard mortality from non-directed fisheries or bycatch represents a management decision. Okay, Canada is compensated for USA bycatch through share-based allocation since Canada's rationale for repeatedly identifying an Area 2B TCUI above annual reference levels under coast-wide model included U.S. bycatch. This represents a U-26 accounting approach that meets U.S.A. commitments under IPHC 2019 AM095 report, paragraph 66. L, the additional U-26 compensation formula presented at this meeting requires further refinement prior to implementation. This refinement is best taken through the MSC process after their work on scale and distribution is complete. 22, the CB noted that the U.S.A. moved to recommend that the Commission reevaluate IPHC 2019 AM095-R, page 18, paragraph 69B, in conjunction with the recommendations from the MSAB on scale and distribution procedures within the MSA to be presented at AM097 in 2021. The vote on that is for Canada in favor 0, against 14 with 0 abstaining, U.S.A. in favor 35, against 0 with 1 abstention. Number 23, the CB noted the following perspective shared by the conference board members from the U.S.A. The 20% historical average share, which is used in the Canada shared-based allocation, is a short-term average that encompasses the years that IPHC Regulatory Area 2B disregarded the IPHC's interim management procedure, as evidenced by the tables reflecting reference versus adopted TCUIs. And that's referencing IPHC 2019 TSD from 015 and 017. B, the provisions of this agreement were not presented to stakeholders in the U.S.A. prior to or early in AM095. The agreement was not available for discussion or vetting by the subsidiary bodies prior to being approved by the Commission. C, the AM095 report does not provide rationale explaining the basis or justification for the specific allocation set in this measure. D, the MSC process is a scientifically based process tasked with evaluating the long-term impacts of scale and distribution procedures in a transparent form. Upon receiving the MSAB report at AM097, the Commission process should allow the review of the interim agreement in light of the MSC results. 24, the CB noted that Canada moved to approve the recommendations of MSAB for a fishing intensity of SPR 43 and mortality limits associated with what Canada and the U.S. agreed to at the 95 IPHC annual meeting. Specifically, Canada in favor 14, against 0 with 0 abstaining, U.S. in favor 0, against 38 with 2 abstaining. A, the sharing agreement whereby IPHC Regulatory Area 2A gets a fixed TCUI and IPHC Regulatory Area 2B gets a share-based allocation from IPHC 2019 AM095-R, paragraph 69. And B, noting that the Commission recommended, again from paragraph 66 in the same, or this time paragraph 66, same reference, evaluating and redefining TCUI to include U-26 component of discard mortalities, including bycatch, as steps toward more comprehensive and responsible management of the resource beginning in 2020. And that's a direct quote from the report. 25, the CB noted the following perspective shared by the conference board from Canada. A, the sharing agreement is a significant piece of work that took years to negotiate, and the process and agreement are well documented. B, at the 94th annual meeting, the parties agreed, quote, that a meeting of commissioners be convened as soon as possible to initiate discussion of alternatives to the current method of stock distribution modeling, formerly apportionment, end quote. That's paragraph 128 of IPHC 2018 AM094-R. C, discussions were held throughout the year, and the Canadian commissioners met regularly with stakeholders to provide updates and get feedback. Delegation meetings by both parties took place during the 95th session of the IPHC annual meeting, AM095. E, the agreement is clearly outlined in the report of the 95th session of the IPHC annual meeting, IPHC 2019 AM095-R. The wording of what was agreed to is very clearly stated in the report. Same reference, there is no ambiguity. Canada has never agreed to the interim coastwide management procedure, formerly referred to as apportionment, as a method for allocating TCUI. H, the assertion that the sharing agreement encompasses bycatch mitigation is factually incorrect. Such an assertion is not supported by the wording in the report of the 95th session of the IPHC annual meeting at IPHC 2019 AM095-R and the IPHC Secretariat's presentations at the IPHC 2020 annual meeting do not reflect such an assertion. I, non-directed commercial mortalities affect Canada and all areas. Tables 1, 2, and 3 of IPHC 2020 AM096 INF06 show the non-directed mortalities and the lost yield that would have been available to the directed Pacific halibut fishery in the absence of bycatch. If the lost yield in the table is totaled, it exceeds 350 million pounds. J, over the years, IPHC has undertaken a number of studies that estimate the lost yield and distribution of lost yield. As Dr. Ian Stewart noted in his presentation, all these studies come to similar conclusions with respect to lost yield. We need to deal with this now. What is proposed is probably not perfect. Nothing will be perfect, but this should not be an excuse for inaction. The conference board has been discussing bycatch for over 20 years. We need to deal with this and move ahead with what was agreed to and not kick this can farther down the road. K, monitoring in some Alaska fisheries was raised earlier, particularly with respect to non-directed commercial mortalities in Area 4C, D, and E. Canada agrees that the Amendment 80 trawl fleet in Area 4C, D, and E has a strong monitoring program and likely produces accurate data. However, improved monitoring was a point of agreement in 2019 as Canada is still not happy with the level of monitoring and subsequent mortality estimates in other Alaska IPHC regulatory areas. L, as noted in IPHC 2020 AM096-05 Rev 2, page 16, IPHC Regulatory Area 3 remains the area where non-directed commercial discard mortality is estimated most poorly. And during the discussion of the sharing the conservation burden, Canada noted that under the current sharing agreement, Area 2A is saved harmless, as are the non-directed commercial fisheries in Alaska, to the detriment of the directed Pacific halibut fisheries in Alaska. And the 2018 FISS showed increased weight per unit effort indices in areas 2B and 4B, whereas only 2B and 3B TCUIs were decreased. 26, the CB noted the motion to amend from the IPHC Regulatory Area 2A stakeholders that the CB should not take a position on the IPHC Regulatory Area 2A TCUI. Vote on that was in favor 3, against 49, abstention of 1. I believe Canada also abstained.
That was all.
That was the whole group. Okay, that's right. That's number. Okay, so rationale: tribal 2A stakeholders claim government-to-government relations with U.S.A. government that precludes comment by the conference board on the Area 2A TCUI. 27, the CB noted that the U.S.A. and Canada maintain that regulatory Area 2A is under the management jurisdiction of the IPHC and that the Area 2A TCUI affects the coastwide SPR, therefore should be considered and included during conference board proceedings. Regulatory area perspectives. IPHC Regulatory Area 2A. The conference board noted the following from IPHC Regulatory Area 2A conference board members. As part of the interim agreement, IPHC Regulatory Area 2A has a fixed TCUI of 1.65 million pounds. Regulatory areas in Alaska, paragraph 29, the CB noted the following from CB members and IPHC regulatory areas in Alaska. A, this is overall, the Alaska management areas recommended TCUIs representing ad hoc adjustments to the 2019 catch levels to balance competing needs associated with U.S.A. catch sharing plans, bycatch increases, and considerations associated with new FISS and commercial weight per unit effort information. For Regulatory Area 2C, the conference board noted the following from IPHC Regulatory Area 2C conference board members. From charter operators, A, guided angler limits in IPHC regulatory area 2C have become restrictive to the point where businesses are losing repeat customers and struggling to attract new business. Guided limits have dropped from a historic 2 Pacific halibut of any size to 1 Pacific halibut 38 inches or smaller or 80 inches and greater, which has lost a lot of appeal. The fleet has come in substantially under allocation recently because the small gap between the lower maximum size limit and a fish not worth harvesting is too narrow. It downgrades the size of fish anglers who reasonably harvest, which has downgrades the size of fish anglers can reasonably harvest, which has resulted in an average Pacific halibut of 31 inches. And B, businesses follow a multi-day destination fishery model highly dependent on halibut, and closures will have severe negative impacts, compounding the problems associated with unfavorable limits. The U.S.A. proposed distribution starting at F43 and applying slope fast down, which provides a 5.82 TCUI for IPHC regulatory area 2C and a resulting charter allocation of 0.772 million pounds, which represents bare minimum needs for charter. From commercial harvesters, the IPHC regulatory area 2C has the largest catch per unit effort of any area. Area 2C has over twice the halibut density as Area 2B with 200 pounds per skate in the set line survey. The average fish size in Area 2C is among the largest of all areas. D, Area 2C contributed over 30% of the IPHC set line survey catch in 2019 with only a 16.4% of the coastwide catch allocation. Area 2C has the lowest bycatch of any area, and F, Area 2C disagrees with taking quota reduction to accommodate the Commissioner's negotiated agreement from last year, but stakeholders are willing to support an 8% reduction to conserve the Pacific halibut resource. Moving on to IPHC regulatory area 3A. Paragraph 31, the CB noted the following from IPHC regulatory area 3A conference board members. TCUIs proposed by the U.S.A. allow for a 1 fish daily bag limit with size restrictions on the second fish and 2 days per week closure. Closure days have significant effect on the broader economy of coastal fishing communities in 3A. B, the magnitude of the cut associated with Canada's proposed TCUI number would require an additional day closure and restrictions that would cripple the charter industry. C, slow up, fast down is especially important to the guided recreational sector to provide stability and predictability to management measures. D, Area 3A commercial fishermen catch per unit effort has increased this past year, which diverges from survey weight per unit effort. 10.3% reduction reflects fast down approach to reduce pressure on stock while buffering against over response to 1 year survey data. Canada noted that the recreational fishery in Area 2B has lived with size restrictions, shortened seasons, and possession limits since at least 2011. And I'm sorry, this was supposed to get moved. It looks like it hasn't made the move yet, so include it here for now. Regulatory Area 3B, the conference board noted the following from IPHC Regulatory Area 3B conference board members. Area 3B has positive performance in the fishery in the set line survey with 3B weight per unit effort up 26% and commercial weight per unit effort up 45%, which is the largest increase in all areas from the 2019 FISS. B, Area 3B has taken significant cuts over the past 2 years, totaling 1.1 million pounds. The 220,000 pound increase this year does not restore that, but does help ease the economic impacts of years of reductions. C, 3B fleet is small, family-run boats struggling to maintain fishing businesses and keep communities viable. So moving to area 4C, D, and E, we didn't have much comment on the record from 4A or 4B, so reflected here is the discussion from 4C, D, and E. Paragraph 33, the CB noted the following from regulatory area 4C, D, and E conference board members. A, TCUI identified in U.S. motion looks like an increase, but instead results in a 19% reduction in the FCUI in 2020 relative to 2019. Under the reference level identified in IM096 policy, the 4C, D, and A FCUI would have been reduced by 66%, which would have shut down the fishery in the Bering Sea, the directed fishery. B, at Canada's proposed TCY and the share that would go to Area 4C, D, and E, the St. Paul processor would not operate and there would not be a directed fishery in the Bering Sea. The TCY identified by the U.S. would still result in an FCY reduction, but would allow the directed fishery to operate and at 1.66 million pounds, allow the 4C, D, and E catch sharing plan to provide 88,000 pounds off the top to the IPHC regulatory area 4E. C, only other way to provide for 4C, D, and E fishery at lower TCYs is to average bycatch over 3 years, but that might not adequately reflect bycatch trends. TCY recommendations. The conference board noted that Canada moved to approve a coastwide TCY of 35.2 million pounds, which reflects a fishing intensity of F43, and the IPHC regulatory area 2A TCY of 1.65 million pounds, and the IPHC regulatory area 2B TCY of 6.84 million pounds. Canada in favor of 14, against 0 with 0 abstentions. The US 0 in favor, 38 against, and 2 abstentions. See also Appendix 3. Paragraph 35, the CB noted that the U.S.A. moved to approve a coastwide TCY of 36.9 million pounds, 4.4% decrease from 2019 TCY, with the following TCYs for each of the IPHC regulatory areas. See also Appendix 3. A, IPHC regulatory area 2A TCY of 1.65 million pounds, which is no change from 2019. B, IPHC regulatory area 2B TCY of 6.72 million pounds, a 1.6% decrease from 2019. C, IPHC regulatory area 2C TCY of 5.82 million pounds, an 8.2% decrease from 2019. IPHC regulatory area 3A TCY of 12.11 million pounds, a 10.3% decrease. IPHC regulatory area 3B TCY of 3.12 million pounds, which is a 7.6% increase from 2019 TCY. F, IPHC regulatory area 4A TCY of 1.94 million pounds, 0% change from 2019. IPHC regulatory area 4B TCY of 1.37 million pounds, which is a 5.5% decrease from 2009 TCY. And finally, IPHC regulatory area 4C, D, and E, a 4.17 million pound TCY, which is a 4.3% increase from 2019 levels. With the resulting votes, Canada in favor 0, against 14, abstain 0, USA in favor 40, against 0, and abstain 0. Regulatory proposals for 2020. The IPHC Secretariat regulatory proposals. Fishery limits. The conference board noted regulatory proposal IPHC 2020 AM096 Prop A1, which aimed to improve clarity and transparency of fishery limits in the IPHC fishery regulations and to provide the framework for mortality limits adopted by the Commission. 37, the CB recommended that the Commission adopt proposal IPHC 2020 AM096 Prop A1 with the addition of the mortality limits for each contracting party by sector as detailed in Section 6. And that was unanimous. CB noted regulatory area IPHC 2020 AM096 Prop 2, which specified fishing periods for the commercial Pacific halibut fisheries. The summary of discussions and recommendations, see Section 5. The CB recommended that the Commission adopt proposal IPHC 2020 AM096 Prop A2 with the addition of the fishing period as detailed in Section 5. That was also unanimous. The CB noted regulatory proposals IPHC 2020 AM096 Prop A3, which proposed amendments to ensure clarity and consistency in the IPHC fishery regulations. The CB noted widespread support and appreciation for efforts by the IPHC Secretariat to simplify and clarify existing regulations. The CB recommended that Commission adopt proposal IPHC 2020 AM096 Prop A3 unanimously. Vessel clearance and IPHC regulatory area 4. The CB noted regulatory proposal IPHC 2020 AM096-Prop A4, which proposed amendments to address the need for clearances when a NOAA fisheries observer or electronic monitoring device is present. The CB recommended that the commission adopt proposal IPHC 2020 AM096-Prop A4 unanimously. The closed area. The conference board noted regulatory proposal IPHC 2020 AM096 Prop A5, which proposed amendments to consider the intent and purpose of the IPHC closed area as defined in the Pacific Halibut Fishery Regulations from 2019 at Section 11, which currently excludes directed Pacific halibut fishing, but allows other forms of mortality such as trawling, and propose the removal of the IPHC closed area from the IPHC Pacific Halibut Fishery Regulations. The CB noted that the IPHC considers IPHC regulatory area 4CD and the closed area as one management area and is treated as such in the stock assessment. The CB noted that opening the IPHC closed area may benefit the fishermen who reside adjacent to that area, and there may be benefits to opening the closed area. The CB noted concerns with non-directed fishing activity in other nursery areas in the waters of Canada and the U.S.A. The CB noted that 45% of the bycatch from IPHC regulatory area 4CD and E and closed areas comes from the closed area section. The CB recommended not opening the closed area without a survey or additional discussion with management agency staff and stakeholders, and that passed unanimously. Contracting party regulatory proposals. Charter management measures and IPHC regulatory areas 2C and 3A. The conference board noted regulatory proposals IPHC 2020 AM096 Prop B1, which proposed IPHC regulation changes for charter recreational Pacific halibut fisheries in the IPHC regulatory areas 2C and 3A in order to achieve the charter Pacific halibut allocation under the North Pacific Fishery Management Council management. The CB recommended that the commission follow the direction of the MPF&C once the TCY levels are adopted, and that was unanimous. Revising definition of IPHC regulatory area 2A-1. The CB noted regulatory proposal IPHC 2020 AM096 Prop B2, which proposed an update to IPHC regulatory language regarding the usual and accustomed fishing areas of Indian tribes with treaty fishing rights to Pacific halibut, with the addition of the geographic reference for Point Chehalis at 4653.30 north latitude. The CB took no action on this proposal. Other stakeholder regulatory proposals. Alaska recreational fisheries. The conference board noted regulatory proposal IPHC 2020 AM096 Prop C1, which proposed a series of common regulations to be applied to all recreational fisheries in Alaska. The CB recommended forwarding this proposal to the North Pacific Fishery Management Council. 7.32 Alaska recreational fisheries. The CB noted regulatory proposal IPHC 2020 AM096 Prop C2, which proposed a common daily bag limit for all non-resident fishers in the recreational fisheries in Alaska. Again, the CB recommended forwarding this proposal to the North Pacific Council. Bycatch. Paragraph 58. The CB noted the following perspectives shared by conference board members from the U.S.A. U.S.A. Observer Program is comprised of several programs that include 100 to 200% observer coverage in catcher processors and Bering Sea Fleet to partial coverage in the Gulf of Alaska. The observer program in Alaska is funded by the commercial fishing fleet, and the observer fee for the partial coverage program was recently increased from 1.25% to 1.65% of the landed value of the catch. The North Pacific Fishery Management Council and the industry are also working to identify cost efficiencies to increase overall observer coverage. The Gulf of Alaska fixed gear fleet includes 30% EM coverage as well as 15% at-sea observer coverage. The Gulf of Alaska pelagic trawl fleet has recently initiated a 2 to 3 year EM pilot project to ensure compliance with king salmon full retention requirements with EM on 100% of the time. 59. The CB noted the following perspectives shared by conference board members from Canada. The Gulf of Alaska coverage is low, 15 to 30%, which does not provide Canada any confidence in U.S.A. bycatch estimates. The commercial groundfish catch monitoring programs in BC include 100% observer monitoring of trawlers, 100% EM monitoring of fixed gear boats, and these costs are also paid by fishermen, working out to 2.7 to 2.8% of the landed value of their catch. It is not appropriate to refer to observer coverage as being 200% when 2 observers are on board a vessel. The rate of observer coverage should refer to the percent of hauls observed or the amount of catch observed, not the number of observers. This should be the standard in both countries. To address observer coverage for trawl fisheries, Canada has initiated a pilot program to use EM plus observers on some trawl vessels. The CB requested the Commission send a letter to the North Pacific Fishery Management Council urging the Council to reduce Pacific halibut bycatch, both in the Bering Sea and in the Gulf of Alaska, with immediate focus and priority on establishing abundance-based management of Bering Sea Pacific halibut bycatch. Other business. 9.1 IPHC Fishery Independent Setline Survey, or paragraph 61. The CB noted the additional review of the proposed 2020 FISS design by Dr. Ray Webster and Dr. Ian Stewart, who clarified the intent and improvements with this design, as well as considerations regarding enhanced sample rate considerations for IPHC regulatory areas 2C, 3A, and 3B. The conference board noted Dr. Ian Stewart's clarifications regarding the 2019 FISS and IPHC regulatory area 3A, which met the IPHC sampling design requirements. The conference board noted the following perspective shared by Canada conference board members. A desire for FISS work to be conducted on the pre-2014 stations for 2020 in 2B, 2C, 3A, and 3B, and for 2A, 4 would be, I think that's supposed to say, and for area 2A and areas 4 would be determined by IPHC and the Secretariat, or the survey stations, and the selection method would be determined in those areas by the Secretariat. B, requesting a broader process on reviewing the proposed stations to include the RAB, SRB, and FISS vessel skippers. The conference board noted the following perspective shared by the U.S.A. conference board members. Desire to not delay expansion of the FIS sampling frame to all FISS stations fished from 2014 through 2019. General support for enhanced random design in core areas. 65, the CB recommended the 2020 FISS encompass all stations within IPHC regulatory area 3A, provided that the expanded survey in that area could be completed without negatively impacting setline surveys in other IPHC requested areas. That was unanimous, with Canada abstaining since it was an Alaska 3A issue. The CB requested a 1-week extension to the FISS tender submission deadline. 9.2, size limits. The CB noted the extensive work completed previously by the IPHC Secretariat on this subject. The CB noted a comment letter from ADF&G Commissioner and North Pacific Fishery Management Council requesting the Commission consider a lower commercial size limit to increase capture of male Pacific halibut and a maximum size limit to reduce pressure on the spawning biomass. The CB noted the following pros and cons of lowering the minimum size limit or introducing a maximum size limit. A, in 2018, CB reviewed a paper produced by the IPHC Secretariat on lowering the size limit that included the following considerations. The value of landed catch is likely to decrease. TCUI may not increase unless selectivity changes. The minimum size limit provides a conservation buffer by reducing potential impacts of harvest rates that may differ from the optimal rate. If fishing behavior changes and the harvest of U32 fish increases, the increased harvest of juvenile fish creates a risk of recruitment overfishing. Finally, releasing large Pacific halibut creates a risk for crew and may increase mortality and may not decrease the pressure on the spawning biomass. Understanding the impacts would require increased catch monitoring. 70, the CB expressed its appreciation for the assistance provided by the IPHC Secretariat and for in-session presentations and support by Dr. Ian Stewart, Dr. Ellen Hicks, Dr. Ray Webster, Dr. Barbara Arbosia, Dr. Piera Carpi, Ms. Laura Erickson, Ms. Monica Moker, and Ms. Kayla Ulezi. Thanks for the help. The CB expressed its appreciation for the assistance provided by the IPHC Secretariat and for in-session IPHC Secretariat support initiated by Dr. Dave Wilson. And I just wanted to add, this is my first time as chair having staff from the Secretariat, and it made a huge difference. And when we finished the report, big appreciation to Laura and Monica and Kayla. Let's see, review of the draft and adoption of the report of the 88th session of the IPHC Conference Board, the report of the 90th session of the IPHC Conference Board, IPHC 2020 CBO 90-R was adopted this morning, February 2020, including the consolidated set of recommendations and requests arising from CBO 90 provided at Appendix 4. So I think on the next pages, you can see the names of the people who participated and their contact information. I don't think you need me to read those, but I'd be happy to. And
I thought I didn't like doing the rules.
and our agenda, and then Appendix 3 gives the numbers broken out. First, what was adopted by Canada, and second was adopted by U.S.A, and then giving the detail relative to the different sectors. And then after that, in Appendix 4, you have our recommendations for some of the, let's see, I guess, so the more specific recommendations, so it's easier for you to see the decision points. And again, I think I've covered all that. So that's probably all we need to cover, unless Jim, anything we missed.
Good job.
Okay.
It's a lot of reading.
Yeah.
Thank you both. Thank you, Linda. And I guess we'll open it up to see if there are questions. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Ryall. Yeah, I have one question while Paul is looking that up. Linda, in the conference board's recommendation that resulted in the coastwide TCEY of 36.9, did that calculation include the most recent year's bycatch number or a 3-year average?
Thank you for that question through the chair. That included the most recent year's bycatch numbers.
Thank you. Mr. Ryall, you ready?
Thanks very much for the presentation, Linda. That was a lot to go through. Maybe we just go to paragraph 64. I just wanted some clarification on what you're meaning there on 64A. So desire to not delay expansion of the fish sampling frame for all stations fished from 214 through 219. Are you saying then that you're looking to have roughly 1,900 stations fished on a regular basis?
I think through the chair, the U.S. side, once we had some additional presentation from Dr. Webster and Dr. Ian, was comfortable with moving to the randomized selection of survey sites, supportive of using the expanded frame, but using the number of sites that were used previously in 2014. And if that's not prior to the expansion of the survey, so the lesser number of survey sites, but the bigger footprint. And I'm not sure we really captured that accurately there.
No, but your explanation was clear.
Mr. Alverson.
So Linda, on opening dates, I've heard concern about an earlier opening date jamming up on the U.S. side, the ability to get the quota numbers out. So was there any discussion that if the commission were to set like the first Saturday of every March as an opening date, that would enhance the ability to do that?
To the chair, Mr. Alverson, that I think is reflected in the comment there about unless it's established somewhere as a consistent earlier opening date. And the thought being that if there was a heads up that that was always going to be opening date, to be able to align sablefish and halibut opening dates in Alaska and potentially open it earlier. And I think just part of a general feeling by the conference board that a longer season helped in a lot of ways with bycatch, with whale predation, with markets. So looking for ways, if possible, to get out a longer season.
Other questions on the conference board's report? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the Processor Advisory Group report.
Good afternoon. I'm Jessie Keplinger and was the chairperson of the PAB for 2020 and
Carl Nordman from Canada.
as vice chairperson.
Vice Chair, yes.
Go ahead, thank you.
PAB 2020. I'm going to skip a few sections just to avoid redundancy, and I'll let you know when I skip over things. So I was actually going to start in the opening session. So opening of the session, the 25th session of the International Pacific Halibut Commission Processor Advisory Board was held in Anchorage, Alaska, USA from the 4th to the 6th of February 2020. A total of 15 voting members attended the session from the 2 contracting parties. The list of participants is provided at Appendix 1. The meeting was opened by the HANA president, Ms. Jessie Keplinger, who welcomed the participants to Anchorage, Alaska. In accordance with Appendix 4, the PAB acknowledged the requirements to elect a chairperson and a vice chairperson of the PAB until the opening of the next PAB meeting in 2021. The PAB called for nominations for the position of chairperson. Ms. Jessie Keplinger was nominated, seconded, and elected as chairperson. The PAB called for nominations for the position of vice chairperson and the PAB, vice chairperson of the PAB until the opening of the next session in 2021. Mr. Carl Nordman was nominated, seconded, and elected as vice chairperson. Adoption of the agenda and arrangements for the session. The PAB adopted the amended agenda as provided in Appendix 2, which included an item to discuss the IPHC interim harvest management policies and a discussion of the proposed FIS redesign. The documents provided to the PAB 025 are those submitted for the 96th session of the IPHC annual meeting. I'm going to skip over section 3. So start with section 4, fishing period, season opening and closing dates. The PAB agreed on an opening date of September 21, March 2020 is preferred. Because it is after the Boston Seafood Expo North America, provides enough time for the U.S.A. federal permits to be processed before the season opens, and is at the beginning of favorable tides for most areas. The opening date is also 3 weeks prior to the sales on Easter, which is on 12 April 2020. The PAB agreed that a closing date of October 31, 2020 is traditional recommendation, supported by diminishing catches, the onset of rough weather, and continuing declines in the fresh fish selling environment due in part to the approaching U.S. Thanksgiving holiday and additional closed processing facilities. Recommendations. The PAB recommended the following fishing period dates for 2020. Opening 21 March at noon local time, 15 in favor, 0 against. Closing 31 October on noon local time, 15 in favor, 0 against. Mortality limits. The PAB noted the IPHC web-based mortality projection tool for use in the PAB AM025 and AM096. The PAB noted this year's quota deliberations were a challenge, due in part to the complexity and inaccessibility of the tables showing TCEY by regulatory area. We understand that there are challenges here, but hope in the future we have a tool or tools that can be used effectively without requiring one of the staff scientists 20 to 30 minutes of calculation times on each specific request. So coast-wide perspectives. The PAB noted that there were discussions of a range between SPR F46 to F41.5 as options within which a balance between industry needs and sustainability resource conservation can be found. Regulatory area perspectives. The PAB noted that each of the IPHC regulatory areas, with the possible exception of regulatory area 3B, were considered in terms of catch share needs, non-directed discard mortality requirements, and the impact of last year's agreements on TCEY. TCEY recommendations. The PAB recommended the following TCEY mortality limits for the 2020 fishing periods as provided in Table 1, which translate to the mortality estimates by sector as provided by the IPHC Secretariat, provided in Appendix 3. And an SPR of 41.5%. In favor, there were 8 in favor, one Canadian and 7 from USA, and there were 7 against, 4 Canadians and 3 from USA. These numbers reflect the needs of the catch share plans and stakeholder comment letter areas of 4C, D, and E, and areas 2C and 3A. The motion adopted did not include U26 mitigation. Some members of the opposing Canadian and US delegations expressed a desire to have a lower fishing intensity, while the Canadians also wanted to retain the U26 mitigation. Table 1, Processor Advisory Board recommendation, TCEY mortality limits for 2020. So IPHC regulatory area 2A, mortality limit of 1.65. Regulatory area 2B, mortality limit of 6.72. Regulatory area 2C, a mortality limit of 5.82. Regulatory area 3A, mortality limit of 12.11. Regulatory area 3B, a mortality limit of 3.12. Regulatory area 4A, a mortality limit of 1.94. Regulatory area 4B, a mortality limit of 1.37. Regulatory area 4C, D, and E, mortality limit of 4.17. with a total TCEY of 36.9. So to, again, avoid redundancy, I'm going to skip until 6.1.3, fishing regulations minor amendments. The PAB agreed to take no action on regulatory proposal IPHC 2020 AM096 Prop A3, which opposed the amendments to ensure clarity and consistency in the IPHC IPHC fishery regulations. The PAB requested that future changes in regulatory language always be presented in red line form. In favor, 15. The PAB noted regulatory proposal A4 referencing vessel clearance and decided that this is a harvester issue and took no action. IPHC closed area. The PAB noted regulatory proposal Prop A5 referring to the removal of the IPHC closed area. The PAB considered a motion that the Commission A, does not open the area to directed Pacific halibut fishing, and B, requests that the North Pacific Fishery Management Council to undertake an action that would close that area to trawl fishing. This motion did not pass. In favor, 5, against 5, and abstained 5. The PAB agreed that the closed area remain closed, i.e. there continues to be no directed halibut fishery in the closed area. The PAB requested that the IPHC revisit scientific and analytical studies and through the use of their data, determine if the area is still defined appropriately, including whether it would be possible to reduce the size of the closed area while still adequately protecting the nursery grounds. The result of this initiative could inform the PAB as well as the North Pacific Fishery Management Council and IPHC policy decisions regarding this area about both trawl and legal gear for the directed halibut fishery. In favor 13, against 0, abstain 1, absent 1. Contracting party regulatory proposals. The PAB noted regulatory proposal B1 and regulatory proposal B2, and then voted to take no action on both regulatory proposal B1 and B2 because they're seen as harvester issues. Other stakeholder regulatory proposals. The PAB agreed to take no action on both regulatory proposal C1 and regulatory proposal C2 as they're seen because they are under the authority of the North Pacific Fishery Management Council. Alaska Recreation, 6.3.2, the PAB agreed, Alaska recreational fisheries. The PAB agreed to take no action on proposal, oh, sorry, I already talked about that one. We're on to other business. Excuse me, the other business. PAB expressed thanks for the presentations made by Dr. Ian Stewart and Dr. Alan Hicks, Dr. Ray Webster, and Dr. Basha Huntsnick, I tried. And Mark Fina of U.S. Seafoods and Chris Woodley of the Groundfish Forum, Suja Hall and Frank Lockhart of NOAA Fisheries. And a special thanks to the IPHC Secretariat staff, Kamala Carroll and Colin Jones for the assistance with the PAB.
Thank you. Did you have anything to add? No. Okay. Thank you very much. Let's see if there are any questions. Don't see that there are any questions, so thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are definitely a little bit ahead of schedule, and maybe I'll see what the inclination is of the other commissioners, but perhaps we take an early afternoon break and perhaps a little bit longer one. And so we will take a break now until 3 p.m. sharp. We're going to go back. Is there public comment? Okay, we're going to jump to the red proposals again. Okay, we'll come back to order. Thank you all for the extra break, and we will go back into the regulatory proposals, some of which we can take action on, I believe, today, and some of which we have to wait till tomorrow, I think. Steve's going to walk us through those.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now that you have received the reports from your two subsidiary bodies and much stakeholder input, we've arrived at the point in the agenda where you can indeed take final action on several agenda items. And so the first of which is regulatory proposals. We ran through the regulatory proposals this morning and to a degree yesterday. So what I will do is introduce them now, and if there's any further discussion you'd like to have, then we'll ask for you to make a decision regarding them, and then we'll move right through the list. And so we'll go through the list from top to bottom. We'll start at proposal A1 from the Secretariat. This is the fishery limits. Noting that you won't actually fill in the tables in this section of the fishery limits, fishery regulations until tomorrow, you can approve the proposal now in terms of the restructuring of the actual regulation. And to remind everyone, the change in the structure of the regulation is simply to add this first table of the TCEY limits that are chosen by the commission tomorrow morning.
Go ahead, Mr. Alverson.
So I was going to make a motion. Do you want to do that?
Please.
Mr. Chair, I would move adoption of the annual meeting 096 proposal A1.
Is there a second?
I think we had a question, and maybe this has already been taken care of, but we note there where it says the commission has adopted the following distributed mortality TCEY values, and so that will be changed to limit.
Yeah, through the chair, Mr. Ryall, correct. That was identified this morning as well as at the agency meeting yesterday, and we will make that correction when we entered into the regulations, and we'll consider that among the minor amendments and editing that we would do as a matter of course.
Okay.
But we have noted your remark about that this morning, that should be limits and not values.
Thank you for that clarification. Is there further questions, or Mr. Alverson's still looking for a second to his motion? Okay, I see it's seconded. Any objection or further discussion before we vote? Seeing none, I think this is a pretty straightforward one, so motion passes with no objection. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we've adopted proposal A1, noting that the actual values, the numbers that go into the two tables will be filled in tomorrow. Next up is proposal A2 from the Secretariat, which is fishing periods. And there's essentially two parts to this. One is the overall commercial fishing period, which applies to the whole coast. And then the second part is the specific fishing periods that apply to the non-tribal directed commercial fishery in IPHC regulatory area 2A. And you, as we discussed this morning, it's similar to the note we just made about proposal A1, we suggest that if you approve the 3-day fishing period for the fishery in IPHC regulatory area 2A, that you specify that it starts on the 4th Monday in June rather than the date that's in the proposal.
Mr. Alverson.
So I understand the part for 2A, but are we also taking up the opening dates for the commercial fisheries up and down the coast as well?
Through the chair, Commissioner Alverson, you can do that this afternoon if you're prepared to make that decision at this point. If you're not, you can wait until tomorrow to finish that.
Well, I don't know what the will of the commission is. If we could try to tackle that today, or we could think about it overnight and tackle it tomorrow.
So Mr. Chairman, I'll try to start out the first part. Usually the dates we take up on Friday, so I'm kind of a day early, I think. But I'll make a motion to adopt the 3-day opening beginning, I think it's the 4th Monday in June. And it would start at 8 a.m. and close at 1800 hours on Wednesday.
There's a second? Seconded by Mr. DeGree. Further discussion? Go, Bob.
I would just say those hours and dates were significantly debated by the enforcement consultants at the Pacific Fishery Management Council and the council itself. So I'm relying on their discussion for the justification for this that was presented to our secretariat.
Okay, further discussion. Seeing none, motion passes. Just on Bob's previous question, I have a sense that maybe some further thinking and discussion needs to occur before we entertain a motion today on the opening and closing dates. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we can consider this partially dealt with, Proposal A2, that portion which has to do with the non-tribal directed commercial fishery and IPHC regulatory area 2A, and you have adopted the 3-day fishing period specifying that it would start on the 4th Monday in June and run from 08 on the first day to 1800 on the 3rd day, which is Wednesday. And as I understand, you'll return to the first part of the proposal, which has to do with the overall commercial fishing period for the whole coast tomorrow.
Yes, so we can move on then to the next.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next up is Proposal A3 from the Secretariat. This is minor amendments, which includes the reordering of the fishery regulations to make them in a more logical and usable framework. We, as we noted this morning, there are several minor amendments to the minor amendments that have been provided to us from our conversation with our agency partners. And we ask that if you approve this one, you approve it with the permission for us to continue to make those minor editorial changes as necessary.
Okay, I am fine with that approach, but I guess we do need a motion to that effect. Go, Mr. Allison, you're on a roll.
All right. So I would make a motion to approve IPHC 2020 annual meeting 096 proposal A3, which recommends changes to improve the clarity and transparency of IPHC fishery regulations. It's found, the wording is found in Appendix A.
Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Ryall. Is there further discussion? Yes, go ahead, Mr. Ryall.
Just an observation, and I think Steve covered this, but a lot of the groundwork to make our lives easy was that this table was to have this done in advance and have a team working from Canada and the U.S. to get to the stage where we have these updated. So appreciation to the team, and so this can move on.
Okay. So, sorry, I lost track of where we were. If there's no objection, the motion passes.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next up is Proposal A4, which has to do with vessel clearances in IPHC regulatory area 4A, B, C, and D, and E. And this is the addition of having a fisheries observer or a working electronic monitoring system on board as to the list of exceptions for when a vessel requires a clearance to fish in those areas. As we noted at this morning's discussion, we coordinated the proposed text with the agencies involved, and we've all agreed on the proposed text. It's a fairly simple addition to the actual regulation. Oops.
Yeah, we had some discussion of this previously. It seemed pretty straightforward, so I'd entertain a motion from our regulatory specialist. Am I right?
Right. I would move IPHC 2020 annual meeting 096, proposal A4, which addresses the need to clearances with National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. NOAA Fisheries observer or electronic monitoring device is present and recommends changes to the IPHC fishery regulations.
Thank you, Mr. Alverson. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. DeGreef. Is there any further questions or discussion? Seeing none, is there any objection? Seeing none, that motion passes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So proposal A4 is adopted. Next up is proposal A5, a secretary proposal to eliminate the IPHC closed area from the IPHC fishery regulations.
And I'll just note, we had also discussed this at some length, and certainly I had foreshadowed my thinking on this, which was that while it makes sense in principle, that it may not have any practical effect pending some potentially rather complicated actions that would be required by the domestic agencies in the North Pacific Council. And that therefore, at least in my opinion, unless there was quite a bit more discussion, collaboration, coordination with that body, it doesn't make sense to move forward on it at this time. That was my thinking on it, but I'll see if other commissioners have thoughts on this.
So, Mr. Chairman, I know that there are people in the crab industry that are interested in entertaining some potential habitat areas of consideration for king crab before the North Pacific Council. I don't know where that may or may not end up, but I don't think endorsing this at this time is the right thing to do. I'd like to maybe have a report on what's happening at the North Pacific Council relative to crab and the overlap of this area at our fall breakaway meeting that's usually held in Bellingham. So that's my recommendation.
Mr. DeGreef.
Yeah, I wouldn't support that, but for a different reason. I note that from IPHC paper 2018 AM94 Proposition A1, when I guess this was revisited, that when this initially came into effect before my existence, it was effective. It closed a foreign fleet out of harvesting these fish, small fish. Now, roughly 50% of the bycatch is caught in that area for CD&E. And for that reason, I think that just considering what the commissioner from Alaska Fish and Game had said about tools in your toolbox, I think that this could be an effective tool in our toolbox in the future. And so therefore, I'd like to not support opening this.
So could you repeat that last part, Mr. DeGreef? You would like to?
I don't support opening a closed area.
Thank you. Mr. Ryall.
I would note that both PAG and Conference Board did not endorse having the area opened either.
Mr. Davis.
Yeah, I'm going to make a motion. I'd like to make a motion to defer this proposal and any decision on eliminating the closed area.
Seconded by Mr. Alverson. Is there any discussion, further discussion on that? None, that motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So proposal A5 is deferred. Moving next to the contracting party proposals, there are two. First one is proposal B1, which is the charter management measures for IPHC regulatory areas 2C and 3A. In a similar way to how you handled A1, which was the fishery limits, you can approve this proposal this afternoon, noting that the actual values, or actual management measures, will be specified tomorrow morning after you make your TCEY decisions.
Correct. So would we want to approve a motion to adopt this, recognizing it would be a formulaic outcome depending on what those decisions are tomorrow?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, you could do that, since it includes everything you need, everything we need to specify the language in the regulations is in there. If you adopt this, then that gives us the direction to choose the right language to put in the regulations based on the allocation to those sectors.
Can I make a motion?
Mr. Yamada.
Yeah. I move that we take IPHC AM096 Prop B1, Revision 1 of the 2C 3A Charter Management Measures, that we adopt this process for this year.
Thank you. Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Ryall. I'd entertain any further discussion if necessary, but I think this one's pretty straightforward as well. So seeing is there any objection? Seeing none, motion passes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So proposal B1 is adopted, and it contains within it the mechanism to establish which management measures will actually go into the regulations based on allocation to that sector determined tomorrow morning. Thank you. And then moving next is proposal B2, which is a clarification of the description of subarea 2A1 in IPHC regulatory area 2A.
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Albers.
You're looking for a motion?
Yes, please.
So I would move adoption of IPHC 2020 annual meeting 096 proposal P2, which revises definition of IPHC regulatory area 2A-1.
Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Davis. Any further discussion necessary? Again, I think this was another really fairly straightforward one, but I'll pause just a moment. Okay, is there any objection? Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So proposal B2 is adopted. Next up are two stakeholder proposals, the first of which is proposal C1. And our recommendation, the Secretariat's recommendation to you was that the proponent be referred to the North Pacific Fishery Management Council, as this is a matter properly under their purview.
Just a question on that, and I agree with you. If we refer them, how does that happen? Do we send a letter to the council saying we got this proposal, or do we send some type of communication or letter to the proposer suggesting that they bring the issue to the North Pacific Council?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's the latter. We get back to the proponent and say the commission, in this case, took no action and refers you to the North Pacific Council.
Go ahead, Mr. Albers.
So in that letter that we send back to these people, could we add that the North Pacific Council usually takes up those regulatory actions at their December council meeting, a month before our annual meeting? I think referencing that would give them a better idea where to go to address their issues.
I'm not sure there's a specific timing for the council. They can entertain proposals at any of their 5 meetings per year. So I think it might be better just to leave that open to the proposer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, moving on.
So thank you. So we'll the commission takes no action on proposal C1 and refers the proponent to the North Pacific Fishery Management Council. Next up is proposal C2, also a stakeholder proposal having to do with management measures for the recreational fisheries in the Alaska IPHC regulatory areas. And likewise, the Secretariat recommends to you that the proponent be referred to the North Pacific Fishery Management Council as the more appropriate venue for action on this item.
And if there's no objection, we will handle that one in the same way that we just handled the previous one.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So that completes the regulatory proposals before you at this annual meeting. Thank you for your expeditious action on dealing with them this afternoon. As we discussed this morning, there are a couple of things from tomorrow's agenda which we may have time to deal with this afternoon at your pleasure. The first of which would be the 3-year meeting calendar.
Yes, let's go ahead and tackle that.
Right, thank you. So coming up is the paper for this meeting detailing the IPHC 3-year meeting calendar. And for everyone's information, we manage our meeting calendar on a 3-year basis so that stakeholders and all involved know when meetings are going to take place. If you on the screen, you'll see the displayed for 2020, 2021, and 2022. 2020 and 2021, of course, have already been approved by previous years, and we will note any changes to those at this annual meeting. And then the rightmost columns, the 2022 dates and places are our proposal to you for your action at this meeting. For the 2020 and 2021 years, the change I'd like to bring to your attention is following the conversation at the interim meeting, we have settled on a location for the next MSAB meeting, and that is to take place in Courtenay, British Columbia in Canada. And that was a change from the interim meeting. There are no other changes from the interim meeting, since the interim meeting on those 2 years worth. And then also we will ask you to make a choice regarding the location for the 98th annual meeting, which will take place in 2022.
I had a couple of questions, but maybe before I go into those, in terms of some conflicts, can you reiterate what you need from us here today?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What we would like from you today is to approve the calendar with any modifications that you direct. So part of the conversation this morning, following this morning's session, had to do with this year's interim meeting, and also then the dates for the annual meeting in 2022, or the location for the annual meeting in 2022.
Go ahead, Mr. Alverson.
So the U.S. section really hasn't had time to talk about this, but I would note that our last annual meeting in Seattle was 2014. And so I encourage that we have it in the Seattle Bellevue area, give a broader range for the Secretariat to look for places. And so that'd be my recommendation.
I don't object to that. Did you say the last time the IPHC met in Seattle was 2014? Like it was sooner than that.
Well,
No, sir, that's correct.
that was my first meeting.
Yeah, that's the last time we met in Seattle was in 2014.
Okay. Is there any thoughts from other commissioners on that? You wanted to say something, Dr. Wilson?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Noting the range of option there of distance with Seattle and Bellevue, we can source a number of opportunities and bring that to the Commission's attention, because the pricing difference will be substantial depending on where we have it. So we might bring a couple of options to you for review, and then the US as the host could approve. Thanks, Chair.
Sounds like a plan. Just in terms of this year, I know there are a couple of conflicts. There's inevitably conflicts between the IPHC meetings, other meetings, including the North Pacific Council meeting or its subsidiary bodies. I know that we have our work meeting scheduled in Bellingham September 16th and 17th, which overlaps with the North Pacific Council September plan team. But my concern is simply that there are a number of IPHC staff as well as National Marine Fisheries Service staff that participate on those groundfish plan team meetings. And so I don't know how we can, whether or how we might reconcile that, or if there's any flexibility, maybe on the part of the IPHC or perhaps on the part of the council. But maybe this is just a suggestion that to contact the North Pacific Council Director, Dave Witherell, and explore mutually whether either body has any flexibility to reconcile that conflict, and just generally to try to coordinate better in the future going forward. And there's no way you're going to always be able to avoid those conflicts. And the second one, and perhaps more important, is the interim meeting December 1st and 2nd in, I believe, is that Seattle or Bellingham? Oh, the work meeting is in Bellingham. I believe there's a conflict between the interim meeting of the IPHC in Seattle, December 1st and 2nd, and the meeting of the North Pacific Fishery Management Council, which starts November 30th and goes to December 8th. And I know that key commission staff participate on that council science and statistical committee, and they clearly, I assume, won't be able to, they're going to have to make a choice unless there's any possibility of moving that interim meeting. I know from experience that the council won't be able to move their December meeting, but I don't know what flexibility we might have on the commission side to move that to the previous week, recognizing that Thursday of the previous week is Thanksgiving. So I'm just raising that, and I recognize Mr.
Thanks, Chris. The first one you were referencing was the September work meeting, and seeing if some flexibilities could be found, either moving it a week earlier or a week later or something like that. Is that right?
Well, I guess I was posing the question to Dr. Wilson and Mr. Keith to explore that possibility.
Yeah. I don't think we would have any objection to moving the meeting. Maybe a preference to the week after versus the week before, but don't have any strong feelings, I don't think.
Yes,
On the interim meeting, there's a conflict with the council, and as you noted that there's the Thanksgiving the week of the 23rd. I was wondering if there was a possibility of moving the meeting to November 18th and 19th, and I don't know whether that impacts upon the ability for the Secretariat to conduct their analysis and have it in time, but just wondering if that could be considered as well.
I would certainly support looking at that as an option, whatever flexibility they have, and can still get it done.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ryall. And we can support that earlier date. We can support either the Monday and Tuesday of the week before, as we did just this past year, or the 18th and 19th, which is the Wednesday and Thursday, I believe, of the week before that. And we can support that. It simply means that we cut off the data for the assessment at a somewhat earlier point, but that's what we always have to cut off the data for the assessment and to get ready for the interim meeting. And there's always a slight update to the assessment in time for the annual meeting, and it's usually a quite small difference, but we can support either of those earlier dates.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ryall. Thank you, Steve. And thank you, David.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I want to clarify, do we consider the meeting calendar adopted then for the coming 3 years with the change to the interim meeting, the 96th interim meeting, this year's interim meeting, possible change for the work meeting that we will explore, noting that the week following that is the scientific review board meeting for us. And then looking at the Seattle Bellevue area for the 98th annual meeting in 2022.
Right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That concludes the meeting calendars item.
I think we had some discussion about the survey, and I can't recall that we're going to try to tackle that this afternoon. Had we gotten enough information to provide guidance to the Secretariat on the FIS survey, or were we going to tackle that tomorrow? You could take a short stand down break. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chris. I think we've had some really good discussion around options for the survey for 2020, and also how we may approach going beyond. So whether maybe the focus right now is on 2020 survey, and I believe both delegations have had an opportunity to review the most updated proposal, and I think it would be worthwhile just to make sure everyone's on the same page and have a short presentation of what is being proposed based upon what's been shared with the most recent proposal. I would say, just from my point of view, the proposal that we saw, the most recent one, that it's basically increasing the number of survey sites to roughly 1,300 in total across all regulatory areas, is something that we think is a sound way to go for 2020. And also think that going forward, that it would be useful to spend a little more time thinking about that, either at this meeting or maybe in one intersessionally.
So you suggesting that in order to address the 2020, we would get at that presentation now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I support that. Have the people ready to do that. You want to take a short? Yeah, let's just take, we're ahead of schedule. Let's take about a 10-minute break. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, we'll come back to order. And we have Dr. Webster and Dr. Stewart at the table. So, do we know what information we're looking for? Unless you had a comment, I was going to turn it over to them.
Okay, good afternoon. So I'm going to review some designs that have been discussed that differ somewhat from the designs that we presented on Monday. One design under discussion is the pre-2014 design for the core areas. And this map here shows 2C through 3B. 2B will be on the following slide. And the orange stations, the orange spots here represent the stations that were fished on an annual basis from 1998 to 2014 in these regulatory areas. And the purple stations are those that are now part of the full FIS grid that were not fished until they were added in the expansion program. So this is the pre-2014 design, but this is a flawed design, and we hope not to go back to this design. So this design has no deep stations. And then, so you see those purple spots right on the shelf edge there. They are not part of the old design. We expanded into deeper and shallow waters. It also has an undersampling of inshore stations, including no stations between 10 and 20 fathoms. And you can see throughout the range of the stock, there are a lot of purple spots that are not part of this design, would not be sampled as part of this design along the inshore regions. It also has some significant gaps in spatial coverage, notably in the Shumagins and Sanak in Western 3B, Cook Inlet, and inside and outside Prince William Sound in Central 3A, spots, locations where there is significant gaps in coverage. So we consider this a flaw design that we're rectifying with the expansion program. But we understand that there's some concerns about the number of stations, the reduced number of stations in the proposal that was presented on Monday. So an alternative that addresses that in a perhaps a smarter way than going back to the old design is to take the number of stations that we had in the old design, but apply them evenly throughout the management areas. Oh yeah, and not to forget 2B, this was the pre-2014 design in regulatory area 2B. And again, no deep stations and some large gaps in spatial coverage. And just to note that the purple dots in the south east there in the inside waters around Vancouver Island are not being considered under any proposal for sampling in 2020. So the gaps in coverage are even more substantial than they were in the other areas in the core of the stock. So an alternative enhanced design has been discussed over the last day or so, and this uses the same number of stations that we fished prior to 2014, but it spreads them evenly throughout in a randomized fashion. So again, the orange stations here represent stations that we would target for fishing in 2020, and the purple are the stations that would be left out of the grid. So all of the dots combined represent the full fish design. Assuming we don't have the resources to fish the full fish design, we're looking for a smarter way of reducing that sampling effort. And so if we're going with the number of, if we feel comfortable, people feel comfortable with the number of stations from the old design, this is a better way of applying that amount of effort to this grid. The advantage of this design in particular is that there will be no bias inherent in this design through systematic emission of parts of the range. So that you'll see in this design, we have deep stations. Maybe not every deep station because of the randomized selection of the stations that are being fished, but we have deep stations. We have inshore stations. We have stations in the Shumagins and Sanak. We have stations in Cook Inlet, and we have stations around Prince William Sound. So there are no systematic gaps in coverage in this design. Likewise, for regulatory area 2B, 170 stations was its footprint prior to 2014, and excluding the inside waters of around Vancouver Island, those 170 stations under this enhanced design would be spread throughout the remainder of the region. So the full FIS footprint again is the combination of the purple and the orange. The orange stations are those that are proposed under this design for fishing in 2020. Again, we have stations east of Haida Gwaii, which we did not have prior to 2014. We have stations in the inlets in the north, which we did not have prior to 2014, and we have deep stations as part of this design. So all habitats are sampled in proportion to their occurrence on average under this proposal, which is not true of the old design, which again introduced the potential of bias that we sought to avoid by having the expansions. Taken as a whole, combining this enhanced design, which in essence is the same design that we presented on Monday with a higher sampling rate. The sampling rate in the design on Monday for the core areas was in the vicinity of 52 or 53% of the stations. This is a substantial increase in that sampling rate for those core areas. And so with that increase, and so the remainder of the areas are as we proposed on Monday. Regulatory areas 2A, 4A, 4B, and 4CD would continue to have a sub-area design or where we focus effort in the parts of those regulatory areas that most, where the sampling is most effective. And we completely sample the stations in 4 CDE. So with the increase in sampling rate in those core areas, that increases the number of stations that will be sampled over above the proposal that we proposed on Monday. And I believe the proposal on Monday had something like 950 something, 960 stations to be sampled, orange dots. And this is an increase of in the vicinity of 300 stations above that. And in addition to those numbers, we are also proposing a 59 station snap gear comparison in Western 4A. So that would be an additional 59 on top of the 1232 that are proposed here. So around 1,300 stations under this enhanced proposal. So that's the summary. I'm happy to take questions.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Webster. Does that give us the information we need, you think, Mr. Ryall?
Yeah, that was very helpful to hear that from Dr. Webster, and just to make sure everyone else, I know that we've had quite a bit of discussion this week, and maybe sometimes hearing it more than once or twice, for me, probably 5, but provides that clarity. Maybe, did you want to see if there were questions, Chris? Or?
Yeah, I guess, are there questions for these gentlemen? I'm assuming you're going to propose a path forward. Is that correct?
I was thinking of doing that.
Wait, I'm sorry, Mr. Davis has a question.
Just a question about whether these randomized sites in 2B account for RCA, rockfish conservation areas and marine protected areas.
They do not. So it's always our intent, I believe it's our intention to continue to apply for permission to fish those sites, and with the expectation that we may not get that permission, but they are included in that design. So there would be a deduction from that station total were we not given permission to fish those sites.
It might be an interesting topic for us to follow up on in the context of this new randomized design approach, and whether there's a way for us to work around that. I don't know that we want to solve that here, but I would make a note of that for follow-up.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ryall.
Yes, thank you. I was thinking that maybe asking Dr. Wilson a question. This is more stations than what had been looking at on Monday, and as Dr. Webster has identified, this is the higher sampling rate, and just whether Dr. Wilson had any thoughts about impacts budget-wise and implementation.
Thank you. Through the chair, in terms of the budget at the end of the survey, we could certainly make it revenue neutral by applying additional skates. The main budget impact, however, would be buying bait in advance for the additional 270 odd stations. And so that's something that we could try and account for later in the year to ensure that cash flow is maintained. But in terms of, as I said, in terms of the broader FIS design, we could still maintain revenue neutrality by adjusting the number of hooks we put in the water up or down. So in that sense, we could certainly do this design. It would just result in obviously more expenditure and more fish coming out of the water, but yeah, we could certainly make it revenue neutral. Thanks, Chair.
Good, Paul.
Given that in the presentation we had, did we want to make a motion to adopt this survey design? I think we need to provide some direction to the commission, yes or no. If so, I would make the motion that we adopt what's being proposed with this survey design for 2020. And yeah.
I'd second that.
Seconded. Further discussion. Mr. Davis.
Are we allowed to make friendly amendments? I support the motion. I would also suggest that we make part of our recommendation moving forward about the process by which we would review a plan for the longer term implementation of the survey. And I would suggest that that include a review of a proposed design through the SRB, as well as some form of engagement with stakeholders, particularly those who have been involved in undertaking the survey, to invite their feedback on what the practicality of the design and any other considerations between now and our meeting cycle later this year and the 2021 annual meeting.
Seems friendly to me. With that addition, is there further discussion? Is there any objection to that path forward? Seeing none, motion passes. If any, unless there are any other issues that the commissioners wish to raise, there's one I wanted to raise again, and I brought this up the other day and I don't know if this is the right place in the agenda or where we might do this, but since we're kind of in the realm of regulatory proposals this afternoon, and that's this issue that was raised, that's been was raised at this meeting by Commissioner Vincent Lang. It's an issue that has been discussed previously by the commission. It's an issue that I certainly have interest in, and that is how, by what process and by what timing we could revisit as a commission the issue of upper and lower size limits. And because I would hope that we could at the next meeting cycle, and I don't know whether that means discussing it at the work session or the interim session leading into the annual meeting, but bring this issue back to the table for us to take another look at and to potentially consider some revisions by the commission to that. So I'd look for suggestions or direction from the Secretariat on how we can accomplish that.
Through the chair, thank you. Yes, given your request that this be brought back as a potential issue for discussion throughout the next annual process, we don't have anything specific to present at this meeting, but we could certainly put it in other business that there's been a request for a discussion around size limits throughout the 2020 commission process at the work meeting and interim meeting. And then at the interim meeting, you could make a decision about whether you wanted to see anything formalized or formally presented for next year's annual meeting. That would probably be a logical way forward. Thanks, Chair.
That works for me if the other commissioners are comfortable with doing that. Mr. Degree.
Yeah, considering the new information we have on sex ratios, I'd also like it to be further investigated, considering those for the undersize and oversize.
That's an important aspect to that consideration. Thank you. Okay, if there's no further discussion or issues, we can adjourn for the day and we'll be back here at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Thank you all.